Tonight we welcome Alison Center, North American Butterfly Association Oregon Chapter President, for our March Science Pub of butterflies in and around the watershed. From Spencer Butte to Fairview Peak, from Mount Pisgah to Dorena Reservoir, our watershed covers many different habitat types. What butterflies can you find in each of them? How can you see and attract butterflies where you live in the watershed? And tonight, that is what you will find out. And with spring on the horizon, this is a great opportunity to learn about these incredible creatures. And with that, welcome to Alison. Maneuvering.
I'll give you a signal at 6:30.
Hi everybody, I'm Alison, and let's see, here we go. So these are all the things I'm going to cover, and I'm going to just jump right in and not read down the list. The North American Butterfly Association is a nonprofit membership association focused on butterflies. And their mission is to educate the public on the importance of butterflies and butterfly conservation. They conduct monitoring programs, and one of those is the 4th of July counts. So these are based on what Audubon does with Christmas bird counts, but because butterflies are in the summer, these are in the summer. So these are throughout North America, so people are doing counts in Canada, all over the U.S. and Mexico, and we'll have some here around Eugene and Cascades, and I'll tell you a little more about that later. So North America has butterflies from the very large. Here's a giant swallowtail. I don't know if it's the largest swallowtail, but it's one of them, to the very small. This is the western pygmy blue. And let's see, I have a zoomed one, and then there it is if you couldn't see it in that picture. But it's about the size, with its wings spread, about the size of a thumbnail. So it's very tiny. So North American Butterfly Association, or NABAC, has a butterfly center in Mission, Texas, which is very fun to visit. My husband and I got to go last October. They have a festival annually, either the end of October or early November. And this is what it looks like. And here, I think we saw over 60 species there. And here are some of them. And this is their NABA's butterfly that they use on their logo, the Mexican blue wing. It's pretty amazing because this part here is the under part of the wings, and when it has that closed, it's camouflaged and you can't see it at all. Then suddenly it opens its wings and you get this beautiful blue butterfly. Locally, we have our Oregon chapter. We started out as the Eugene Springfield chapter and then realized we were the only chapter in Oregon, and for some legal reasons needed to change our name, so we changed it to NABA Oregon. But if you want to find our website, you can either search on that or just put NABA Eugene, and the website will tell you about upcoming meetings and field trips and such. Our next meeting will be in Eugene on April 10th at the Garden Club on High Street, and that will also be about local butterflies, but it'll be going into detail on what to look for, so just as the season starts. So if you want more butterflies, and we don't get enough tonight, come and join us in Eugene there at the April meeting. Also, this website has a lot of information, a lot of links, and so you can see plants to grow in your own garden, native plants, the timing when these plants bloom, in case so that you could have blooms throughout the season. About our field trips, just all kinds of things. So hopefully you'll check that out. And if you want to come on any field trips with us, those are free, and it'll tell about the field trips also. So here's the way station sign. I thought, boy, that has everything I need on it, so I just took a photo of the sign. This is the one at Bay Stewart. This is just to review the butterfly life cycle. So we start with the egg, and then go to the caterpillar stage, then to the chrysalis, and then to the adults. How can you tell a moth from a butterfly? Here's the butterfly, a West Coast lady. Here's the moth, white-lined sphinx moth. This one was on our porch, under the porch light. Moths usually lay their wings back when they land, where butterflies will either have them out like this or straight up. Also, the moths either have antennas without clubs, like these, or they have really feathery antenna. Butterflies have clubs on the end of their antenna. So this is a butterfly, this is a moth. Here you might think, why is a little caterpillar on a Christmas teacup? That's because when we brought in some wood for our wood stove, the cats were playing with something. This little guy was hibernating and jumped off, or probably fell off, and I wasn't sure if it was alive or not, so I just put it there, and then it started crawling around. They do hibernate over the winter, so I eventually put it back outside under a log, and hopefully it did okay. But this is to show what butterflies do for the winter. So the purplish popper here will spend the winter as eggs, and they have a strategy where they try to, in the fall, they'll lay some eggs deep inside a flower or curled leaves, and then some closer to the edge. And what they're trying to do is beat the odds. So the ones that are inside are closer to the heart of the plant. Those overwinter as eggs, and then will become caterpillars in the spring. The ones that are to the outer part, those will become caterpillars, and they're trying to beat to the frost and see if they can get out another bunch of adult butterflies. So some winter as caterpillars, and caterpillars actually will hibernate. There's some Arctic species that they'll go through 2 winters before they become butterflies. The Moss's elfin, that one will overwinter as a chrysalis. And when I first started learning about butterflies, I kind of assumed all of them would overwinter as a chrysalis, but it turns out that just a few do. Some will overwinter as adults. So we have 2 strategies. This one, California tortoiseshell, it looks a little ragged, so that is one that overwintered, and then in the spring looks a little worn. And then the other is the monarch, whose strategy is to migrate. And here's more. I know some of you have been to talks with the migration, but what's interesting is this part of the country will go to Mexico, or they may go to Florida, plus there's a little part of Florida where they don't migrate. They're just there year-round. Our monarchs tend to go to California, but now and then they'll switch and go to Mexico. But there's quite a few overwintering places along the coast of California. A lot of times they use the eucalyptus, which is not a native species, but for some reason they really like it. Here's a tagging program. This is from Washington State University. Dr. James has been tagging lots of monarchs. It's actually a prison in Walla Walla where the prisoners raise monarchs all summer. So they have a butterfly garden and milkweed on the prison grounds, and when they get females, they'll bring them inside, or they'll collect the eggs and raise them, give them a tag, and let them go again. This one here is from Elkton. If you've ever been to the Elkton Community Education Center, it's really a fun place, really informative, and they're doing tagging. And so is SOMA, which is the Southern Oregon Monarch Association. And I think last year at Elkton, you could adopt a butterfly and have your own butterfly with its own tag, and off it went, and then find out later how it did. If you happen to see one of these butterflies, and if you can take a photo, or if you have binoculars, can get the information, you email it to what it says on the tag, which is monarch@wsu.edu. So it's a really easy way to help with monarch research. Here's some other butterfly strategies on not getting eaten. So one of them is camouflage. This one here is from Texas. It's a tailed orange, but kind of has a leaf look. This photo, the butterfly is here, actually. This is a leaf right there. This is a common wood nymph. We'll see it again. The other way is to be toxic and let everyone know that you're toxic. These become toxic because in the war between plants and insects that eat them, the plants come out with all kinds of different chemicals. And some of those chemicals are useful for us as drugs. But some of the insects, some of these butterflies in particular, have figured out how to deal with those toxins, but they want that to be known so that things don't eat them. And so they put out warning colors. Another thing is eye spots. I was reading a book about eye spots, and one thing it pointed out was that the eye spots aren't necessarily from birds, that maybe it's trying to mimic something like a snake. So you can see if you think the snake eyes look like the eye spots on this tawny emperor. So this is a famous experiment by Dr. Lincoln Brower, which was to see, do animals learn that things taste bad? So this blue jay's gone down in history as having eaten this monarch and then promptly thrown it up, and then refusing to eat any other monarchs, which is good news. So that's how the warning color works. Somebody has to eat it first to realize that it's not good, but then the rest are protected. So monarchs have some relatives. Here's a monarch. These are queens. These are soldiers. Only the monarch occurs around here. But if you're headed to Texas and want to know the difference, You can see the veining here in the monarch. The queen, it doesn't go all the way, and it has a lot more spots. The soldier looks a lot like the queen, but it has these patches, which are kind of subtle, but they're there. So here we go. Here was what we had in the trivia. Here's the monarch. Here's the viceroy. The viceroy is not in the monarch genus. It's actually an admiral. And the difference is this. The viceroy is smaller and just has a little bit different patterning. Another thing to note is all these black and white dots. I'll get back to that. A Batesian mimicry is where one species is toxic and its mimics are not. So they're taking advantage of the toxic one, hoping that whatever birds, other animals will be confused and think that they're looking at the toxic one. They used to think in this case that it was a Batesian mimicry, but they have found that the viceroy has quite a few different food plants, and one of them is willows, which you may know you get the chemical that you can turn into aspirin out of willows. So more recent studies have shown that the viceroy is actually somewhat toxic in its own right, depending what it was eating as a caterpillar. So in that case, it becomes Müllerian mimicry, which is a case where a whole group of butterflies or animals look very similar, and they all kind of protect each other. So they all are toxic. So a recent talk I went to talked about what eats monarchs. And down in Mexico, we have this, the black-backed oriole, that is a native bird to Mexico, and our own black-headed grosbeak, a migrant that we'll see up here come summer. And nobody said anything about it, but it struck me. Does it strike you that they seem to also have those warning colors? So they have ways of getting around the toxins in the monarchs. I've always wondered, do they themselves have some of those toxins, and do accipiters or something that might want to eat them avoid them? So I looked up what accipiters, which are Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks and goshawks, what they eat, because they are bird-eating hawks, and they seem to prefer things like thrushes and quail and pigeon, so things that are more camouflage rather than bright. So I don't know for sure that these birds have any toxins, but it was an interesting question. Okay, remember the black, the black with the white spots? This is the slimy salamander, and there's one person's theory that all those dots on those monarchs and queens and soldiers were perhaps trying to mimic this. So this guy, the way it protects itself is by producing a lot of slime. And this salamander is from the southeast. So it overlaps where we have the queens and the soldiers and monarchs. And now we get to here, the Coast Fork Willamette watershed. So our watershed down where it meets the confluence of the Middle Fork and Coast Fork is at about 500 feet up to Bohemia Mountain, which my sources said was about 5,900 feet. And we have butterflies throughout that whole area. And here's some of the places, Mount Pisgah. Some of the habitats there are riparian. We have Willamette Valley Prairie, oak woodland. Here's the top of Spencer Butte. We have hilltop meadows forest. This is kind of in between Coast Range and Cascades. Bohemia Mountain and Fairview Peak, where we have rocky outcrops, lots of meadows, also forest. Here's some of the wildflowers up there. Right here's a little copper, enjoying them. This is actually closer to Blue River, but I wanted to point out that forest is also a habitat for butterflies. Here's Bake Stewart Park. It's being restored for Willamette Valley Prairie. Also has riparian and woodlands there. Oh, here's down by the riverbank with the monkey flower. So when you come for Bikes and Blooms, you might be able to see it looking like this. Here we have some red columbine, chocolate lily, larkspur, and California bumblebee taking advantage of that. Some camas, checker mallow, lupin. What I wanted to point out here was that sometimes you'll hear that California poppies aren't the best thing to put in a pollinator garden because they don't have a lot of nectar, but they do have pollen. So things like bees that really need the pollen like them. And I saw this one out there that was just rolling around in this flower. And then I'm going to go over some of the butterflies. So here, since we've seen a lot of monarchs, are caterpillars that use the milkweeds. The cabbage white, sometimes you hear people call the cabbage white a moth, but it actually is a butterfly. It's from Europe. It hasn't displaced any of our native butterflies. What's displaced them is the habitat. So this butterfly does like your garden crops. If you would like to have butterflies in your yard, though, don't use BT on it because that will kill all the butterflies. So it's better to pick them off or grow some extra cabbage or broccoli for them. For these, sometimes they're the earliest one you'll see flying around. The male has one spot, the female has 2 spots. Oh, here's other whites. This one has a lot of common names, but it's a margined white or mustard white. On Oregon wild cucumber, which also has this great name, Old Man. This one tends to be more in the mountains, more Coast Range or Cascades, not so much in the valley. However, cottage grows in an interesting spot near the Calapooya Divide, which is actually a connection between the Cascades and the Coast Range. It's one place where different species, from owls to voles to butterflies, can actually cross, and you can get genetic mixing between the Cascade populations and Coast Range populations. But sometimes you can see some of these species that tend to be more in the mountains. You can see them around here. So this was at Bake Stewart Park, which is there by Dorena. Here's a western white. Here's a pine white. Its host plants are conifers. Here it is here, but look on this goldenrod, all these bumblebees are here enjoying it too. The Sarah orange tip. I saw one of these right by Dorena School. This is the male. The female's a little more yellow. The orange sulfur. This butterfly is very common, but it's a very fast flyer. So if you see something yellow streak by you, it's probably this one. Some of the females are this alba, which is a light colored form. You might think it's a cabbage white, and then you get closer and you realize it's the alba form of the orange sulfur. If you have a lot of grassland around your house, you might see this. This is a ochre ringlet. Here it is in the grass, so it camouflages pretty well, but if you can get close to it, it has this really pretty orange color. This is another grass species, the common wood nymph. However, you will find it on trees sometimes. Here it is next to a leaf. One thing about this, when you see it flying around, it tends to look darker. It kind of has a chocolate brown look. And then you get closer, you see the eye spots on it. So this here is a bird and a silvery emperor, but I have it up there to point out colors. A lot of colors are from pigments like reds and oranges and yellows, but the color blue for birds and butterflies, other things that are iridescent, is more structural. So it's not a pigment making it blue, it's like a prism. And you can see that here, where this side, you can't see the color, but this side with the light a different way, you can. This is to introduce the blue butterflies. Most of them, the males look like this on the top, and the way you tell the difference is from the side. The females are usually dark gray or brown. Here's some spring azures. They're also known as echo azures or echo blues because right now there's different taxonomists have a different idea about them, so their name is in flux. These two I saw at Bake Stewart by the river, and what they're doing is called mudding. They're gathering minerals or salts, and the males gather these minerals, and then when they mate, they make a spermophore, which is a combination of nutrients as well as the sperm that they give to the female, so that gives her enough nutrients for laying all those eggs. This is our smallest butterfly that you'll find around here, the eastern tailed blue. It's called tailed because it has these little things sticking out. So with the eye spots, could look like an insect head to birds, and often when you see a butterfly that has a bite out of it, that's where the bite will be. So this side is the female, and here's the male. And here's the western-tailed blue. They can be pretty tricky to tell apart. When I've asked people about them, they say, well, there's less orange, and they're lighter in color. Of course, if you don't have both of them, that's a little tricky to tell. This is the Anna's blue or northern blue, more of a cascade species. It's the Bois de Val blue. This one is very common in the mountains. One way you can tell it is it has all the spots have these white halos around it. However, one of its subspecies is the Fender's blue, which is an endangered butterfly. Its host plant is a threatened species, the Kincaid's lupin. So here we have the male and female, and it looks quite a bit like the Bois de Val blue, but the halos aren't quite as big. And you can see these in the West Eugene wetlands. And then people, whenever they find Kincaid's lupin, try to see if they can see these there also. One thing about this butterfly in restoration is that it does not fly very far. It's a spring butterfly. When things are not very warm, butterflies need to be hot to really fly well. So unlike birding where you get up early and might be really cold, with butterflies you get up late, but you have to be prepared to be hot because they really like it at 90 degrees or more. So these guys, they do not move very far. Their whole life they might move 10 or 20 meters. They're not big movers. So when they do restoration out in the wetlands, they have to make the patches close enough together that a butterfly could get from one to the next. Here's the silvery blue. It looks quite a bit like that last one, like the fenders, but it only has one line instead of the extra line that the fenders had. These are a lot more common, and they have more host, where the fenders is only on Kincaid's lupin. This one is on many lupins or peas. So the Ackman blue here is, it's more mountains, but you can see it. I saw it on one of the garden tours a few years ago. This one has this really lovely iridescent blue there. Here's a mountain species dotted blue. This species is interesting, the gray blue, because there's a very similar looking one called the Arctic blue. The Arctic blue is just in the Washington Cascades. This one was only known to be in the southern Oregon Cascades, and there is this big gap. But recently, just in the last few years, they've been found in Douglas County and Lane County. So if you get out there in the mountains, go up Mount Hood, see if there's any up there. That would be an interesting find. So I'm switching to coppers. The great copper we don't have here, but it is in the wetlands. This one was thought to be extirpated from the Willamette Valley, and when they started doing restorations in the West Eugene wetlands, this butterfly showed up. So there somewhere was a remnant population. This one's kind of opposite to Fender's blue. This one can really fly, and really fly fast. So if you're walking through the West Eugene wetlands and a silver streak goes by, this might be what it was. This one here, the lilac-bordered copper, can find in the mountain meadows of the Cascades. So if you go up to Fairview Peak or Bohemia Mountain, you can see this one. Purplish copper is a little more widespread, so you can also see this one in the valley. It's the Mariposa copper sitting on my hand. This one's host plants are blueberries and huckleberries. The western pine elfin, this is more of a coastal species, but I put it in to compare with the Moss's elfin here. This is more on rocky slopes that you'd see this one. And then the brown elfin. This one of its host plants is the Oregon grape. I was at Bake Stewart there by the river, and I saw an elfin, and just as I was getting my binoculars on it to figure out what it was, a lizard ran out and ate it. So I'll never know. So here's a gray hair streak. They're a very common butterfly throughout the U.S., and depending on what host plant they're using, the caterpillars can be different colors, so they can range from green to pink. This one, you rarely see them with their wings open, but this was in the morning when it was still warming up. So one way they warm up is to spread their wings and get the sun. So I snapped a quick photo. This one I took in my garden on mint. So this mint is overtaking one of my garden patches, but I keep it because the gray hair streak will show up on there every year. Sylvan hair streak has willows as its host plant. It doesn't look much different, but there's this little silver spot here and a little different pattern on the wings from the gray hair streak. The cedar or Nelson's juniper hair streak Its host plant is cedars. So you might see this in your yard if you have cedar trees. I saw one outside my house a couple of years ago. There's also a Johnson's hair streak that looks very similar, except the white line there is a lot more solid. They live in the mistletoe of hemlock trees and are somewhat rare and hard to see. And the only photo I could find was one of a museum specimen, so I thought I would just tell you about it instead of putting that up. This one, bramble green or Sheridan's, is confusing, and so its name is even confusing, Perplexa. Because supposedly the bramble looks like this with a brown patch, but this is also a bramble. And the Sheridan looks like this with a white streak, but sometimes these have white streaks. So some people consider it one species with two subspecies. Some think that it's two species. When you look at range maps, depending on your field guide, some will tell you that one's only on the coast and one's only in the Cascades, except that there's spots where one is where the other is and the other's where that one is. So the best way to tell is that the bramble green uses deer vetch and the Sheridan seems to use buckwheat. So if you're fortunate, it's actually on the plant, but if it's not on the plant, it might be hard to tell. They are a really pretty iridescent green, though, if you get to see one. This checker spot has a lot of names, too. Its host plant is snowberry, and you can see it down here in Cottage Grove. Other checker spots look pretty similar, but this one has more orange and white in it, Edith's checker spot. Also, this is called the Edith's line, this little black line that's in the orange rather than on the edge. One thing of note about the Edith itself is a mountain species, but the Taylor's checker spot that you might have heard about is an endangered subspecies that you can find near Corvallis. There's 12 known areas in Washington and 2 in Oregon where this butterfly still exists. It's also jumped to a non-native host plant, so the narrow leaf plantain seems to be, at least the host plant it seems to prefer around Corvallis, which when you're thinking about native versus non-native species, sometimes if you've got non-natives, you need to be careful before you pull them all out, because sometimes native species will have switched over. And this is one of the butterfly species the Oregon Zoo raises. Here's the Hoffman's checker spot. This is a lesson in how easy anyone can be confused. So I took this photo thinking it was a field crescent, and it wasn't until I was putting this talk together and I went, wait a minute, that's a Hoffman's. And here's the field crescent. The field crescent is a smaller butterfly, but there's an overlap in size. This one you could find throughout the region. And it can be hard to tell those field crescents from the Mylida females, which are a little darker than the males. And this is a courting pair. So these are little orange butterflies. So if you see a little orange butterfly that they like to sit flat like this, this is probably what you have. When you get to fritillaries, all the fritillaries like violets, and all of them look pretty much the same on top. And so most field guides tell you that if you can say it's a fritillary, that should make you happy, because trying to tell them apart can be very difficult. This one's a little easier, the Pacific fritillary. It's smaller, and it has a different pattern there on the side, underside. The Great Spangled Fritillary is also easier to tell because it's the biggest one, the big male, and the female's actually a different color. It has this darker color here. When I was at Bake Stewart, I was all excited thinking we'd gotten a monarch when I saw this big orange butterfly zipping around, but it turned out it was a male Great Spangled Fritillary, which was still exciting. So I'll just show you a few of the other fritillaries. You can see how similar they look. There's the Hydaspes. This one, the spots are less silvery, which if you're looking straight on, you can't always tell, but when they tip a little bit, you can sometimes really see the silver in some of the other species. Like this one, the Zerine fritillary. This is the Oregon silver spot, which is a subspecies of the Zerine fritillary. And this is the other one that the Oregon Zoo is raising. This one has coastal populations, and its coastal habitat was restored, but since it's violets, it really needs it to be low, and so it's an annual job for the Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife Service and folks who are keeping this habitat, because they need to keep the blackberries out, the Scotch broom out, and tall grasses out, so they do a lot of work maintaining this habitat. Moving on to the ladies, here's a painted lady. Painted ladies are known worldwide, except for Antarctica. Some studies suggest that they are always migrating, so you'll see them come up in the summer, and then they'll have generation after generation. They'll start back south in the summertime, end up down in South America, or go from Africa to Europe. Here's the American lady. The thing to note here is this little dot, which the West Coast lady doesn't have, but otherwise they look really very similar. It's the red admiral or admirable, and here it is sitting on a log. There's some idea that maybe it looks like a little bird, that this extra red stripe is a strategy to look like a bird, so I'll let you see if you think that that seems true or not. Angle wings are different sorts of commas. This is just a sample of what some of them are like, but I won't go into all of them. California tortoiseshells, these have a real boom or bust kind of lifestyle. Their host plant is Ceanothus, and so when you have a forest fire and then you get a lot of brush, these will come in, and the population will get so high, it can be in the thousands, that it'll strip all of the Ceanothus. Then when there's no more food, the population will crash, and there might be 4 or 5 years where you can hardly find them at all, and then you get another flush of Ceanothus, and you get another huge population of these. So the Milbert's tortoiseshell, this and the ladies really like nettles. So if you've got some property with some woods, if you can tolerate having nettles. Apparently Winston Churchill really liked butterflies and was always arguing with his gardeners to leave the nettles. This mourning cloak is another butterfly that will hibernate over winter. So it might be one of the longest lived butterflies, living up to 10 months. Many butterflies in their adult form may only live for a few weeks to a few months. Lorquin's admiral. This butterfly can be quite territorial. It'll have a seat on a bush, and then it'll jump out at anything that flies by, another butterfly or a bird. But if you happen to walk by and disturb it, if you stand still, it'll come back to its same spot, and you can get a good look at it. Here's a California sister, looks quite similar, whose host plant is oaks, especially live oaks and chinkapins. This is another mimicry group. The field guides I was looking at were saying that this is the one that's toxic and that the Lorquin's admiral wasn't, but one of the Lorquin's admiral's host plant is the willows. So there's a chance that it is actually somewhat toxic too. The way to tell them apart, this one, the orange is on the edge. The sister, the orange spot is surrounded by black. Then we get into the swallowtails. This is probably the butterfly you might see the most of, the western tiger swallowtail. These are also territorial, so if you have time to watch one at a park, you'll see them making this route, and if they happen to come together, you'll see a little butterfly tussle. And the Oregon swallowtail, this one really you can only see in the Columbia Gorge, but it looks a lot like this one that you can see all over. The difference being that the spot here is surrounded, where the other one, the spot was on the edge, so that's kind of subtle. The pale swallowtail is not as yellow. And then Claudius parnation, this one's host plant is the bleeding heart. And then we have some skippers. I'll go through these pretty quickly. So this is the Perseus, common checkered. This one can look very blue in the sun. Checkered skipper, which is, the difference is it has this little X. Woodland skippers. Sachem skippers here on the zinnias. Mardon skipper, which is another sensitive species that is being managed to, with the hope to avoid it becoming listed as threatened. So dun skipper and a common roadside. And then a few moths, so tansy ragwort. This was here as a biological control to control the tansy, so it's a European. Bluebell tiger moth you might see up in the mountains. Red-shouldered tenuka. Here's the sphinx moth again. And then if you ever wondered, what does a woolly bear turn into? This is it, the Isabella moth. Host plants, plantains, lupin, and dandelions. So speaking of dandelions, or little lawn daisies, I just took these photos last week, and there's little flies visiting them. So when nothing else is available for pollen, these plants can be. So maybe you might want to leave a few in your yard for your friendly pollinators. So I'm quickly going to go through if you want to make your own garden. Here's John growing out milkweed. John does have milkweed seeds available, so see him after the talk. I mean, this evening he does. This is at the Elkton Butterfly Pavilion. This is their way station, so they've got shrubs and different nectar plants, some milkweed host plants. Here we are at Bake Stewart. Here's the ribbon cutting. Here's later in the summer. This is my son Tristan and John. We're out there watering. And this is what we did end up with. A common checkered skipper visited. some interesting little green bees. So next month we'll be on bees. We can find out what those are. Got a daddy leg, long legs on the milkweed, and a little skipper right there. And here you can do this in your own yard. So here's a little crab spider I found in my yard on Queen Anne's lace. And here's what we did. We grubbed out the blackberries. There's my husband. Here's the plants ready to go in. We tried this as a guard to keep blackberries from coming up. Only partially successful. There we go, dirt, shoveling, planting, watering, and I also put in seeds. And then they started coming up. Here, I finally had a visitor, a little cabbage white. And end of season. And then this is another transition for next talk. So this was a bumblebee. This is actually just sage. And it was very popular with the bees. So you may wonder, how many field guides should you have? This is how many I have. But you don't need that many. I actually have some. A few here for sale that our local NABA group has made. They're butterflies of Lane County. And they're $15, and the money goes to support our chapter. I have a few for sale. Also, you can get them at Down to Earth, or if you come to our NABA meeting on April 10th, you can buy them there along with t-shirts. Also, books on making your own garden, and then just general. And then photo credits. So I want to thank these people from our NABA chapter, and then all these other websites that I helped myself to their photos. So, and are there any questions? I've been watching butterflies. The question was, how long have I been watching butterflies? And probably for about 15 years where I knew what they were. Before that, I'd always noticed them and thought they were really pretty. But I think it was when I was working as a biologist for BLM, and one of the botanists invited me out to a meadow to see if, because she'd found Kincaid's lupin, to see if there were Fender's blue, and all these butterflies went by that I thought, I don't know what those are. So that was the start of me finding it out.
I've been wondering what a 30-foot wall might do for the migration of the monarch butterflies.
So the question was, what would the 30-foot wall, or a 30-foot wall, do for monarch migration? It probably depends how it's built. I mean, if it was a brick wall, I still think they can fly over the top. When we went to Texas, we could see part of a wall being built that's probably like 14 feet in El Paso, and it was different slats, metal slats, so there would be room for the butterfly to go through. So I think probably okay for butterflies, probably not so great for things like jaguars.
Why do butterflies have slits in the wings and some don't?
Slits? Oh, and the two swings. Slits in the wings?
Why do butterflies have slits in their wings and some other ones don't?
Right. Slits, you know.
Okay, so why do butterflies have slits in their wings? Well, the butterflies have 4 wings, actually, 2 front wings and 2 back wings. And Some other insects might just have one pair of wings.
So there's no slit in those wings, it's just
Yeah, so it's the wings kind of overlapping.
So I was thinking about your comment about most butterflies only live a few weeks, but obviously migratory butterflies must have to live longer. Can you give me an idea of what the one has to travel further south?
Yeah, so the question was, if butterflies only live a few weeks or months, then how do they do the migration? So with the monarchs, the last generation, the September generation, actually lives that whole time, survives until the next spring. So it's the one that goes to Mexico and lives there, partially hibernates during the winter. And then it starts back and will get into Texas or California, and that's where it'll breed. And then those butterflies will head north. And so it's those other butterflies that might only live for a few months. So the monarchs, there's about 4 to 5 generations. If you're looking at the painted ladies, it sounds like they just keep hopping. So they'll have a group of young and butterflies. Those will head north. They'll reproduce. Those might head further north. Then they start going south again. We'll make it all the way to South America, to the Amazon.
We're on some land close to here, and we're trying to bring back the Taylor's checker spot. And you mentioned that they're sometimes eating plantains, and we've been trying to plant the golden paintbrush, which is their main food source. But what are plantains, and are they easily grown?
So the question was that they're planting a garden and hoping to get the Taylor's checker spot. So they have the paintbrush, which is another host plant, but these butterflies also use the narrow leaf plantain. I think it's kind of a weedy plant. So I think it's not too hard to grow. What might be difficult is that the known population is up by Corvallis, and they might not find you.
It's working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I was going to say, because then if you have a source. Oh, so this is a 10-year project with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So she'll have a source of butterflies. Any other questions?
I've heard that the European violet is harmful to some butterflies. Address that.
Is the European violet harmful to some butterflies? And I was at the same talk where we heard that, but that's as much as I know about it. A lot of these fritillaries are more mountain species, so if you live in town, your chance of getting a fritillary is probably not that strong. But to be sure, you could find native violets instead. Any other questions?
Just a comment that sphinx moth show off the tomato plants work. And I found somewhere that you have to have some soil at the bottom.
Okay, John was sharing that the sphinx moth needs to go underground to make a chrysalis. And so that's, so if you want to raise them, then you need to not just have the chrysalis or have the caterpillar, you need to have the soil available.
Are any of the toxic butterflies like deadly or cause like severe reactions to any like birds that eat them or anything like that?
So the question is, do any of the toxic butterflies, can they actually cause death to their predators? And it seems with the monarchs that they don't. I don't know about the cinnabar, the ones that eat the tansy. From what I've read, they seem pretty toxic. There's also a moth I didn't show, but apparently it can produce cyanide, and an entomologist almost killed herself by biting it because she was trying to test how palatable different moths and butterflies actually were. So she bit it and got a dose of cyanide, but she did survive. So they can be. So I wouldn't randomly go around tasting these different butterflies and moths. Are there any other questions?
Well, just discuss butterfly bush, but the eye, the situation about that, displacing native willows, but and it's
So the question was about Budley eye, or the butterfly bush, butterfly plant, which was sold quite a few years ago, was sold a lot for butterflies as a good nectar plant. And it is a good nectar plant, but what it turned out was it's also is a good riparian plant, and so it started taking over some riparian areas, replacing willows and such, so it was put on the noxious weed list. And I don't know if nurseries are allowed to sell it. I know that there are some forms of it they're trying to get around its propensity for spreading.
Yeah, it's actually been listed in one area by OSU as invasive, but there's no enforcement. So they're still selling these other Albertifolia, other species of blue, but they're still selling very common.
So it is still sold, although it is on the noxious weed list. So probably better not to get it. If you have one and it's in your yard and you're not close to a waterway, you probably don't have to yank it out. But if you are close to waterways, don't plant them. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all.
I would clap, but I have stuff in my hands. Thank you, Allison. That was a super informative talk, and I learned a lot, and there were so many beautiful pictures, and I know you took most of them yourself. So thank you. That was really great.